What's up, everybody? This is John from Coding Addict, and welcome to another Power Hour live stream. And as always, I'm joined by one and only Mr. Paul Bratlovsky, the mastermind behind the Coding After 30.
Yeah,
Okay,
after 20, after 20, you're right. Coding after 20. Thank you. I
I'll
appreciate
cut this one out. So, I mean, it's unbelievable. I have two sentences and I can't properly say them. Mastermind behind Coding After 30 channel. How are you, Paul? I have to ask you, how was your Thanksgiving?
it. It was really good. I think I set a world record for how much weight you could gain in the span of 2 days. But no, I think you should start introducing me as Coding After 20. I like it.
But have you ever checked? Is that channel name taken or?
Probably not, because, like, no, probably it probably exists. People in their 20s, they either doing the thing or they're not thinking like, should I switch careers yet? It's still like fairly early in your journey. So
I mean, yeah, in some cases they're still enjoying the initial job that you get after school, and then you realize, yeah. For me, I enjoyed Thanksgiving, but I must address the elephant in the room. I do have a black eye, and even though I want to say like that it's an extremely interesting story, it's not. So yeah, basically, I met the guy in the gym, and he's like, "Do you code JavaScript or do you like
exactly, I was going to say
BHP?"
exactly. That's what
And I'm like,
happens.
"No, I like JavaScript." He's like, "No, actually, yeah, my." So we had dinner, blah blah blah, and my daughter's now at the stage where her favorite thing is kind of chasing around the room, basically, and she's still at that stage where she doesn't know how to say get me. Well, she knows, but like she's always comes to, she's like, get you, get you, get you, and that's supposed to, you're supposed to get her. So we're chasing each other around the room, and I decide that I'm gonna just hide on the couch, basically. And next thing what I see is my child flying right on top of the couch, and midair she just switches, and with the back of her head just smashes me on the eyebrow. And yeah, and there's blood, and my wife is like freaking out, of course, for the kid. I mean,
Not you. Who cares
screw the
about you?
husband. I
Yeah,
mean, but I
exactly.
mean, understandably so. Everything went fine. It was a little bit of blood, and my daughter get to play the doctor after that, so she was happy. But my wife's emergency room nurse, so she was laughing because usually she gets gunshot wounds, whatever, the accidents or whatever. And she's like saying, but when holidays come around, then usually it comes domestic, like, people get together and get drunk. And she's like, well, now you can go and tell them that your 2-year-old basically smashed you in the head. And this morning she's like, what do you think about the live stream? What are you going to do? And I'm like, nothing. I mean, what I can do, I'm just going to straight
Yeah,
up tell them
yeah,
this ridiculous story how my kid is just beating me up. And she's like, what about the glasses? And I'm like, because I wear these ones while I'm
yeah, yeah.
coding,
There you
basically.
go.
And I'm like, well, yeah, how is this going to really help me? Right. So,
You can't see it. You can't see.
I mean, it's in there.
Exactly.
And then another one, well, what am I going to wear? These ones?
Oh, there you
So,
go. Oh, wow. Look at that. That looks good.
so, so basically,
You
I
know,
show, but then I'll have to explain anyway why I'm wearing these ones. So,
listen, when you put the black glasses on, you look like Johnny Cage from Mortal Kombat. No joke. So
hey,
that's what you do when you go out, right? Just LA
um,
streets, a celebrity,
y-
put the glasses on.
yeah, the inside, I like those people the best who wear glasses inside.
Yeah,
That's like,
100%.
yeah. So, long story short, I know I wasted someone's 4 minutes, but yeah, that's, if you're wondering, yes, I do have a good old doozy there. Thanks for everyone who suggested with my sleep issues. Everything is done. Luckily, I just realized that I'm drinking coffee too late, so now everything's back to normal. Schedule is awesome. So yeah, thank you to everyone who suggested stuff. Everything worked out. If you want to check out some cool content, be sure to visit Paul's channel. There's a bunch of cool stuff like custom projects and that sort of thing. And yep, the channel name is Coding After 30. And while you're there, be sure to smash the like button and help with an algorithm. As far as weekly tips slash fails, basically they could be the same, right? So this week I have, I was trying to do something. I was trying to remove the property from the object before I send it back. And in JavaScript, there's this delete operator, and then you basically go, let's say you have a person object, right? So person.name or whatever, and then you can remove it. You go with delete operator and person, and then whatever is the property name. Now, the small, like tiny gotcha there is that it only works on the properties that are on the object. Basically, the one, the actual object that you're trying to delete it off, which sounds very straightforward if you're creating the entire program. But if you're like trying to remove something that's coming back from the library, you're like, I spend like, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes. I'm like literally staring at the screen. I'm like comparing like every smallest letter because I was thinking there has to be some dumb like typo or something. And then I'm like, okay, no, I just have to start, doing research. And then, of course, yeah, 15 whatever minutes later, I'm like, so I'm getting this from library. And if there is basically a property on a prototype up the chain, then it's not going to work. And then I'm like, okay, so now I know. What about you? Any hot tips slash fails?
I mean, I have fails all the time, but instead of a fail, I've been experimenting with React clone element. So
Hmm.
I've been trying to basically, like, if you have a parent component and you want to pass children, yeah, you could pass it as children, but you don't get to access or pass down props to
Hmm.
those children. And so I guess the workaround around that is just clone the element and then you could pass the props to the child component.
Hmm.
So that's something I've been exploring because I wanted to make like a list component where you could basically pass whatever component you want and it'll just render it with the props or with the data that you pass into it. But I didn't want to do, like list component and then do like either pass render prop or pass a component into it. I just wanted to work with children to make it look cleaner. So now I have like a list component and then I have videos, or video, whatever, as a child element, and it'll just iterate through the data and do the thing. So I thought it's kind of cool.
Yeah, this is actually a very interesting topic. Do you follow uh, Michael Jackson? And not the pop star, but he's the guy who created React Router. He's one of the guys, and so he has this interesting concept of composition. And so basically, his idea is that actually I can leave the link in the description of this video, where essentially he talks about the context API as far as that. In his opinion, it's not as necessary as people use it. It's only for certain things because now it's pretty much. I mean, I'm the guilty one as well, where you literally stuck everything in the context and you're good to go. But his approach is making composition, where essentially it's kind of hard to explain right now. Like you need to see the code example but essentially where he uses a lot of these children props. So instead of like putting 10 components all over the application, you use the children prop and constantly keep putting back those components that you're going to render. And that way you don't have to do, let's say, if you have app component, right? Instead of having, let's say, dashboard component, and then rest of the components are inside of that file already. Instead, you use the children in a dashboard component, and then you keep sticking like whatever is in there. So then let's imagine that in the app component, you have a state, right? So instead of passing it from dashboard to dashboard page to dashboard bash, he goes like around and does it. Now, my kind of only thing was that he showed kind of like a straight up approach, and that really made sense. But I'm just wondering, like, what do you do? Like, I kind of get it where you can get custom hooks. Let's say for a user, right? You log in the user and you have that custom hook all the time. So each component that needs it, you just grab the hook and you check, hey, user exists or not. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't remember, but I think you did something similar in your.
I was gonna say, like, you could do a lot of that reusability stuff with custom hooks, and I like that approach. But you could also do it with composition when you have the parent element that might have whatever state. Like, for instance, an example could be, I saw you could have a parent element that you pass the URL to, and let's say it'll get the data, and then whatever children you pass into that parent element have access to that state, to that data. And like, you could do that. One thing that I like at my work that people say is that don't overcomplicate code by creating these crazy, children relationships. So I think, like, in my case, let's say, uh, you know, if I want to have a reusable list component that I just want to have in one place, it like makes sense. It's not too crazy. But if I had to do child of a child of a child, and you're just like piling stuff on, I think it gets away too quickly. One cool example I saw, and something that I had to do at work, is creating a table where you have like the table row is the parent, and then you have, you know, each column is a field, and that way, you know, you could do whatever you need to do with each individual field, and it looks nice in your code because you have like the parent and then you have the row of fields. But then when it iterates through the data, it will render all the rows, but you just have that one definition of a row, I guess. I'm not explaining it too well. I'll have to show an example, but that was like a good example of using this type of like parent and child class, because it's very easy to see what's going on when you see it. You're like, oh, this is a table with, and this is the rows, and this is the data that it's getting. And if you wanted to add an on-click event to a specific row, it's fairly simple.
Yeah, no, this is something that really interests me on how, approach for bigger applications, and exactly like you said, getting the job done without overcomplicating everything. Because again, for a simple example, yeah, you grab it and you display it, and you're good to go. And you're kind of like, well, there's no need for context. And I'm not, look, he's extremely smart, creating React Router, creating Remix. I'm not disputing what he's saying. It's just, it would be great if he could showcase with like really tough, like complex example, like big application, at least, some kind of guidance, because it's a very interesting concept. I'm not disputing that, you can avoid using that, but it's just, it's always nice to see the more complex approach and everything. And what's also interesting, sorry, I'm interrupting. I just want to finish this one. So with React Router 6, you can see how they have implemented it, because now with the nested routes, what they're doing is, let's say you have a route, and then let's imagine you have, I don't know, blogs route. So this is going to be blogs route. And then inside of it, you have a bunch of routes. Or, you know what, not blogs, let's do dashboard, it's going to be easier. So you have dashboard, and then in dashboard, you have stats, profile, or whatever. So all of them are going to be relative to the dashboard. So you go dashboard, and then inside you place that inside of it, that actual route component, and then whatever is going to be the parent, it's automatically going to be relative. So it's going to be relative right away. So whatever you place inside right away, it's going to be relative to the parent. And in that dashboard component, the parent, there's a special component called outlet, which looks exactly like children, where basically you take that outlet and you just place it wherever you want in that component. So there's that shared layout. Let's say for all those pages, there's going to be navbar, footer, or whatever. And it's just, it was interesting when I saw that video, and then I saw that the component in React Router 6, I'm like, yeah, you can clearly see where he's going with this idea of decomposition instead of, passing it down and down and down. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I was going to say it makes sense, like if you're making a library, like regardless if it's a UI library or something that's going to be reused, and like you want to have like centralized code base, like I think that's fine. But for like my personal applications, kind of basically knowing that fine line, like if you're not going to ever use that component, why go through all that work? Just have it localized and be self-contained thing. And but for me, that's actually where like I always fight myself on, because I do want to try this advanced composition topics and learn more, but at the same time, it's like an overkill for what I'm doing, and it makes no sense. So I used to do that a lot at work, and they actually made me refactor the code and rewrite it in a way where it's just simple. And the reason why is, like, the guy would ask me, is this being used anywhere else? No? Okay, then it just stays here. Don't worry about trying to do composition, and like he's like, you're not rewriting like a UI library and stuff like that. So I think that's like very important to remember when doing stuff.
And while we're on this topic, there's another bone that I want to pick a little bit, where there's again, I'm mostly hitting this on LinkedIn. I guess I'm not following the proper people on Twitter. It's mostly LinkedIn, and where essentially there's always this never-ending debate: should you use context API? Should you use this? But there's never real like kind of like example of the downsides of context API. There's always this like, well, yeah, the performance is worse and yada 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 yada. But there's no like, okay, if you use context, is it like what 3 times slower? Is it like there's always these examples of, okay, if you have a million components, well, let me stop you right there. I don't have a million components. So what are we talking about here? About, like some minuscule, or is it one of those things again that it's just being passed on, passed on, passed on, and then when somebody turns around and says, well, how much exactly is their performance loss? Then it's like, I don't know, but and that's my issue, kind of.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think because I have another question now, and I think we'll just have questions. Let's do the topic, and then we'll
Okay,
get
okay,
into it. I
yeah,
know
but
because I have a question that I think is going to take another 5 minutes, but I do
yeah,
want to
no,
ask
but
you
this
afterwards.
one, I have to say, this is, yeah, this is a rabbit hole that I enjoy going down as far as thinking about it, because I think it's one of those things where you can literally look at from many perspectives and everything. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
because I have like I had the reason why I want to stop is because I had the same conversation with so many people, and it's like the
uh,
same thing. But you should, if in this case, you should just use Redux and like
yeah,
or why use and
yeah.
whatever. It's like, but it'll be good eventually for people to know the like the big picture, you know, like what the difference is.
As far as my preference, I still do enjoy, if I can, I do use local state over global state. So let's imagine this. If I have some kind of form, and if I know that I'm not going to be changing the value from some other component or whatever, I do prefer it locally. Simply because if, let's say, it's just easier, you go to that component, you see what you're passing, you set up everything, and that's that idea where they push, like they say, like, well, local state is faster. Now, for me, it's more like local state is more convenient. Why would I, pass something up and down if I can simply set it up locally? So, yeah,
Yeah,
I guess this
yeah.
this main theme is going to be React,
No, no,
React
100%.
mainstay.
And to be honest, like 100%, people should not be afraid of using local state. I think I see it once people learn context, they put everything into context, even if it shouldn't be in context, especially for form examples, just because, you're only using it in one place. And then also, like, not to go too far down this rabbit hole, but if you have a component, like you could make, in theory, not in theory, but you could actually do it, you could make a use form hook, which has all the form state that you could just pass to any form component and not have to use context. You know what I mean? So I think it's like, unless it's like a problem you're having where the only way to solve it is with using context, but people should at least be able to tell the difference, you know.
Yeah, no, I've built quite a few those, and I really enjoy them. But for some reason, I kind of like now I'm again either it's local or it's in that thing, because I've noticed, like, yeah, I did initially, I did build them and I find them useful, but for now it's kind of like I do make that choice or
Yeah,
whatever.
I'll tell you a funny story. So my application, I use contacts, and they were like, "Why? Like you're only trying to store like this basic data for a user. Just use local storage." And they told me to refactor because they're like, without this, he's like using GraphQL. You
Mm.
don't need to, because GraphQL has its own store. Like you don't have to worry about it. And we just needed to store the user. And he's like, it's an overkill of using contacts. Just put it in local storage and get it from there. And so I had to refactor it. So it's
But this is another one. Now we're definitely going down the rabbit hole. Okay, I'm sorry. Like, there's gonna be a main theme, but anyway, I'll ask you after main theme. Just remind me. There is a question that I wanted to ask you last time, and that's really, really important and interesting for me. So, and yeah, so our main theme is fundamentals over hot new thing. Now, let me give you like a brief history. So basically, when I started, the Angular one was the hot new thing, right? So everybody was rushing to it and whatever. And at that point, I just didn't feel comfortable with. I believe I watched like, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes of it. And I realized, look, my JavaScript, chops are not up to the par. So I'm just gonna, continue messing with HTML and CSS and JavaScript. Now, granted, to be fair, I wasn't doing this like very diligently, meaning at that time I was still going for electrical engineering. So it was more like I was doing it, I don't know, once a week practicing or some stuff along those lines. It wasn't really serious. So it wasn't like I just, dropped everything and went for HTML and CSS and JavaScript. What I'm trying to say is I didn't go for Angular at the time, right? And then I just continued. And by the time I reached, the frameworks, uh, actually React was already a very solid choice. All right. And as I'm looking back, essentially I have three kind of takeaways that I want to share. Uh, First, if I take a look at everything that I learned back then, as far as when the Angular 1 came out, the fundamentals are pretty much the same, right? Now, there are some additions. Yes, there's with every year they'll release a little bit of features in a JavaScript, which is awesome and cool and whatnot, unless you try to use them in a Safari where they don't work, as a side note. But yeah, there's Flex and Grid and all that. And my point is that it might seem like a waste of your time. It might seem like, hey, I need to rush to React and whatever. And I'm not. And again, my last point is going to be that you don't need to learn 20 years HTML and CSS. So before you turn it off, that's not what I'm saying. But which you kind of what I want to stress is that the things you'll learn as far as fundamentals, they will like you'll take them all along the journey, and you'll be golden because only as I have picked up React, there's already have been two iterations, and there's actually have been two before. So what I'm trying to say is that a lot of times you're actually spending your time better on getting those fundamentals, and then once you're like ready and whatever, then you jump on the framework because with the frameworks it like constant iteration. That's just the reality. You it's constantly changing. There's a better way now. The React 18 is coming out again. A lot of times, not everything changes as far as framework, but when it comes to fundamentals, they will change way less. Okay, let me put it in very simple English. What do you think about this one, Paul?
Yeah, like 100%. And frameworks do change. Like talk about Angular 1 going to whatever they like release next. If you spend all this time learning Angular 1 and not understand fundamentals, and then all of a sudden they change everything, learning Angular 2 would feel like it's alien. But if you knew enough JavaScript, you would be like, oh, they just like there's still like basics of JavaScript. And so for me, it's I always, even though like it's so much easier to build stuff with React, I always go back to study fundamentals of JavaScript. And there's always stuff to learn, by the way. Just because I know that at some point someday React is not going to be the top dog, but JavaScript, the things that it's built on, the basics, like you said, will always stay the same. So 100% agree with you. uh, you know
Then the second point I have, frameworks are built on top of fundamentals. So that's one thing you need to remember that like when you're building with a framework, you're still using those same fundamentals. Let's say if you create a React component, it's not like this magic thing that just creates the HTML and CSS and everything for you. You'll still need to use HTML tags, styles, and JavaScript. Essentially, you're still building for a web. And your React Gatsby next project, Next.js, will be only as extensive as your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript knowledge. Now, look, I'm not saying complex. I'm saying extensive. There's a huge difference. So what I'm trying to say is that with, let's say, a framework, let me give you an example. Gatsby 4, right? They came up with this defer page build feature. What that means is that let's imagine that you have 1,000 pages, and usually a big like pain point with Gatsby was the fact that every time you run build, let's say I add another blog post, it's just going to start building all those pages, right? So that could take 20 minutes, half an hour, or whatever, which is a little bit ridiculous. So they came up with this feature where essentially now when you make a page in the configuration, what you can do, you can say defer. What that means is that unless the user comes in there and actually looks at the page, I mean, it's not even built. They kind of build it on the fly when the page is requested, not when you building out the project. And that is an extremely complex feature if you think about it. However, you can have those 1,000 pages, you can display them. But if you don't know how to set up a card in those pages, I mean, it's kind of like having an extremely fast car. There's an awesome engine, and you have Zaporozhets, and Paul knows what it, how it looks like.
Best Russian car made ever.
So
Just kidding.
again, probably stupid example, but the point is, it's gonna look like an Amish buggy, right? So you have this extremely fast engine, but there's like nothing inside there. So yeah, what's your opinion on that one?
I mean, like if you know the fundamentals, especially with React, there's a lot of JavaScript that you're writing. So if you're not familiar with the fundamentals, you might run into an issue where you think it's something to do with React, but in reality, it's just JavaScript. And so I think once you have the fundamentals, learning React is obviously easier, and you could be much, much more productive because you're able to tell the difference. Like this is what the library provides, and this is the JavaScript that I have to write myself, and stuff like that. Because what's cool, like I remember learning React before I knew enough JavaScript, and I'll be like, what is this utils folder? And it's basically straight up vanilla JavaScript functions that somebody plays there. But I didn't know, like, I'm like, is this like a, you know, special React function, right? Just because you don't know enough basic JavaScript that you start to assume that everything is React. And that, that's just not true. And I feel like when you know the fundamentals, when React changes, you'll be able to change and learn faster knowing JavaScript, right? Because, like you said, React is built on JavaScript, so it's pretty good.
Yeah, that's another extra point that I don't have in the notes, but Paul brought it up, so I want to add to this one. Yeah, like if you're comfortable with JavaScript, you'll have no problem picking any of the frameworks. They all pretty much say solve the same problems. It's just a little bit different, right? Svelte.
I
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, so I was going to say I have like a very easy example. Like a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed for a job with Angular, right? And I decided not to go for it, but I literally like bought a tutorial just to see, and because exactly I knew enough JavaScript, I was quickly able to see like I don't like Angular, personally. They do things a little bit different. It's a good framework, by the way. Don't think like Angular is really good for people that like Angular. I just like React, but because of my JavaScript knowledge, I was able to tell what the difference is between React and Angular, and I didn't like the way they do their templating. I really like with JSX, just so much nicer and easier. And I think that's something you'll be able to do once you have the fundamentals, is be able to understand like different frameworks, tell the difference between them, and then understand that it's a tool that's built on top of the language that you're using.
And the third one, I have the framework solve specific problems. So let's take, for example, HTML. There is no concept of reusability. Well, that's a doozy one for me. Reusability. And essentially, everyone knows this who built a site with multiple pages. What do you do when you have a nav bar? Unless you're using PHP or whatever. Well, you copy and paste the code. Why? Well, because there is no concept of reusing. What does React have? Well, React has the component, correct? So the same goes for application state in vanilla JS. When you have bigger application, users, products, again, we can go on and on and on. I mean, it's tough when you're starting having multiple pages. Like the thing is, essentially everything is like nice and cute in the beginning, but like when you start having multiple parts of your application that need to communicate with itself, like somehow, some way, that's when you need to figure out, do I store this in local storage? What do I do? Do I set up some kind of, again, module or whatever that somehow magically communicates and whatever? And again, I'm not going down the rabbit hole of global state, but in React, you do have a state. Whether you go with Context API, whether you go with Redux, whatever, that is already your choice. But the idea is that there is already something in place. So if you have built something bigger with Vanilla.js, you went through those pain points, you're like, oh, this is cool. So now I can use this one and actually save myself time and trouble and whatever, right? And last kind of example, re-render. Like everyone who has done a simple list in JavaScript knows when you fetch that list or whatever, let's say you get it even from a local one. What do you think happens when you run filter on it? Well, nothing happens. Unless you repaint the browser, nothing happens. You just remove the items from the list. But in React, you have this concept of re-render. So you set it up with use state, that's your item, you change the stuff, and then automatically, as magic, it pops up, right? And let me just kind of just finish everything by saying frameworks are there to help you. So they make more complex things easy, like routing, SEO, image optimization, but they won't replace those fundamentals. And essentially, I know some people might disagree with me, but you will go as far as your fundamentals. And very, very last point, I'm not saying you have to spend next 20 years on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript before you get to the framework. You can still learn those things after or while you're learning the framework. You just need to have this open mind where, getting to the framework is not end all be all. Getting to the framework is like, okay, I learned this awesome tool. I can still add a bunch of things to my developer's tool belt. What's your take on that one?
Yeah, 100%. Like for instance, understanding fundamentals of JavaScript, jumping into Node was not that difficult outside of just learning Node specific things. But once like fundamentals will go a long way no matter what you do. Like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, fundamentals are super important. Because there's a lot of problems you could solve with fundamentals, which is really awesome.
Another hot topic in developer community, especially I wouldn't say even backend. What's funny? It's mostly I don't see backend guys debating this as much. Maybe they're just not on the forefront of the debate. Uh, Cookies versus straight up JWT in the local storage. So to give you kind of the quick brief intro of like where I'm going with this, like it's very easy to just set up the JWT, send it back, you store it in local storage, but of course there's these security issues. So another approach, you can set up the cookie. Now my big question is here is this one. So cookies are supposed to be safer, right? And I use cookies in my applications. I have no like really horse in this race. I always try to like look at all the approaches and come up with like what makes the most sense for me in that particular application. My question is this one. It's funny that with all that being said, Strappy sends it back as straight up JWT. Auth 0 sends it back as straight up. You can actually store it in local storage. So, I mean, what is your experience with that? Like,
So that's an interesting question because like I had somebody ask me like, why are you doing JWT in local storage if it's not secure? And I don't know like the exact answer, but when I asked the same question to someone who's been doing it for a while, they said that it's a public token that like it it's not going to help him to like hack your system. It's just something that you use to identify you as a logged in user, but you have to be logged in as that user to get that token. Like there's no other way to like people are like, oh, you could go and change it, and then what? Then it doesn't match the back end, and then it'll say you're not authorized. So like I don't know what the problem is, and I don't think I've seen a case where that's an issue unless it's super secret token that you should never pass to the front end. But all the stuff that you store in local storage as a JW token, that's a public token, as I'm told, that it's not really gonna mess anything up because it's not the only thing that you need.
and this is exactly what I'm hearing back from conversations with like I purposely reach out to the backend developers to find out about this, right? And this is exactly what I'm getting back where like and when I'm not gonna like again over generalize everything because again I actually prefer cookies for a simple reason that browser handles everything. You don't have to store it anywhere. Just it pretty much comes in, right? The only difference, the only kind of pain point is making sure that your applications are, that everything is set up as far as being on the same server. So the problem with the cookies is you cannot just randomly start sending them around. Like either you need to set up the proxy or it needs to be actually on your server somehow, some way, let's say like ready built application or whatever. So but that once you figure that one out, as far as front end, it's actually much easier. It's much easier. Comes in, comes out. You don't even have to like worry about anything storing or
Yeah,
whatever.
I mean, like Apollo client, um, like expects a JW token that literally you get from whatever the front end from local storage. Like I mean, it's not a secret; it's there, But yeah, like I was wondering that a while ago. Like it's not a big security issue. Like if it's handled, if you're doing the right thing and using it for the right thing, like it's not a big deal. Um, like I had a question for you since you have like an excellent Node course, and like sometimes when people do, let's say, a React front end application, like they'll learn about pagination from the front end, right? Just like basically how you could set it up. But in my opinion, I feel like all the pagination should be done in the back end, And so like that's like my opinion. Like, but in your thought, is there any time where pagination would be done on the front end, like when you're working with?
I mean, the only reason if you don't build the backend. In general, I prefer first of all, I prefer setting up in a backend because to tell you honestly, the whole flow, and I'm not just talking about the backend, I'm not talking about the front end, the whole flow is much faster. It's much straightforward. You're not dealing with this, okay, let me grab this data. Then I need to separate it in arrays. At least that's my approach. Set it up in arrays. Then you like make this nested thing or whatever. No, like on a backend, you literally you just split up all your items like based on limit and skip. Then you ship it back, and I just what I do is I on a backend I just count how many pages I have. So the front end knows do I have four, do I have three, or whatever. So as that data comes in on the front end, I'm just like, how many buttons do I need? Do I need 20? Do I need one? Do I need whatever? And then with every button, what you simply do is you have a on click or whatever, and it simply updates the URL. I want page number one, page number two, and it's much more easier than that. And I think in my React course we built a project with I want to say Hacker News API or whatever, where they also nicely send in data, and that was the first one for me because I think prior to that didn't really had that much experience with API sending me those pages, and that's where I was like, wow, I need to learn how to do that on backend because it's on the front end like extremely like smooth flow. So I definitely would, it's again not to repeat myself, but it's actually very easy to set it up on a backend. It's not that hard.
Yeah, and I think like something like Strappy, I think they by default or limit the request to 100 items. So if you have 150 items, you have no choice but to use pagination. But what I found out, like from work experience, is you would have like a bunch of developers. They'll do the filtering and pagination on the front end. When they're testing stuff, and they might have like I don't know, like 1,000 items, and then all of a sudden, like they tell you about the production database, and you'll get a mock-up database. It has like hundred thousands of items, and now like when you use that front page like client side pagination, like you think the app is broken, but no, it's just loading all the data like 100,000 items. And to me, I'm like, wow, like I see the when this goes wrong, like you have to make sure that it happens on the back end and you only get what you want. And so for me, like I'm like, I get it, like you got to do pagination on the back end. And so like at work, like I have to do pagination, and of course, it's easy to set it up client side on the front end and just whatever. At least like from like anybody who does more React. But I'm like, no, don't do it that way because it's gonna have issues long term, especially if you have huge amounts of data. And so like I'm like, okay, handle it the right way. Which Strappy, by the way, because Strappy is the best thing ever. It's very easy to do that with Strappy.
You know what, Paul? I need to do a little bit push. Like, first of all, I'll agree with you, and I'll continue with our pagination because there's one more thing that I want to add. But there's also we need to set up I think another kind of what is the name for that? Another section or whatever in this live stream. Let's not call this podcast, but live stream where I come up with weekly griefs about Strappy, and I'll give you one right now. So I had in my in Gatsby course, somebody complained, and this is a valid complaint though. And again, we're joking here. Like
Yeah, yeah.
whoever is watching, we're
I'm
just
gonna be
kidding.
pretty serious about this one. Just kidding. Yeah, go ahead.
So for them, first of all, they leave the comment. They're like, so what am I supposed to do? Strappy doesn't install with Node 16. Do I need to go back to 14? I'm like, that's weird. So I go to the docs, and it literally says that if you want to work, it's for 14.
14. Yeah,
And again,
I had the same problem recently.
this is
Just
one
to
of those
test it.
this is one of those things where I'm just trying to explain, like, and this is really cool because Paul has his opinions, and I like bouncing these ideas off because I want to see like where he goes with this. But yeah, for me, it's always like Strappy.
Listen, Note 16 is overrated. It literally came out a couple of weeks ago. However long it's been
Have
around,
you
no one
met the
cares
course
about Note
students?
16.
Have you
No,
met
I
course
don't.
students?
Yes. Uh, no, but here's the thing: like you got to understand, like stuff changes so rapidly that it's really hard for people to update stuff to be on bleeding edge. I'm sure Strappy 4, when it comes out, will probably support Note 16. But it's funny because I got Strappy for beta, and I'm like, let me do it with Node 16, and it blew up. It didn't work, and I'm like, no big deal. Node 14 still works. And what's funny, I know big companies will try using like Node 12 for like their production application that billions of dollars gets traded. So I think like you don't have to do the most bleeding edge thing.
Okay, we lost
Okay,
your
you should.
sorry, your audio a little bit
Was
disappeared.
it? It's probably because I was saying how awesome
Yeah,
Strappy
right.
was. The algorithm was like,
Yeah, no, but this is why I enjoy having these conversations with Paul, because he does make very, very solid points. He's kind of 100% correct. There's, again, we already talked about in previous live streams where you're not going to believe where like the sum of the production applications on what versions they're actually running.
yeah.
It's not React 18. I can tell you
yeah, yeah,
that
yeah,
right
yeah,
away.
yeah, 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 yeah. But here's the funny thing: like, I'm sure people saw in tutorials when, like, the instructor will make like a quick 1 minute video. By the way, when you do npm install, use these specific versions so you could have a nice experience doing the app. Which
Yeah.
is funny. I would never listen to that, and then halfway through the tutorial, I'm like, why is it not working? And then I'll be like, oh, different version, not compatible, whatever. So, but at the end of the day, it's literally not a big deal. Like for a lot of people who think like, oh, if it doesn't work at Node 16, because it's just the way it is.
No, and this is definitely tough for them because it's not like a some kind of cloud, hosted thing where you're just literally communicating with the API. That would mean that they only need to update whatever their, project is on that cloud. Of course, it's much tougher because it gets pulled to all kinds of local computers and everybody's like, well, this doesn't work. I mean, again, what they're doing is really tough. So this is not me in any slightest way, complaining about them or whatever. So, and what I do want to agree with you though about, I think last time when we talked about MERN in general, anyway, about the fact the full stack project or whatnot, and I think you made a really good point where you said like that as far as front end, it literally like the more logic you can push to the backend to the server, the more your essentially your front end is just that UI thing, right? You just display the data, whatever. And actually, as far as functionality, it is easier on the server because there is already queries for you. There's all this setup, like what you need to do as far as filtering, sorting, whatever. It's a good practice when you're starting, let's say front end JavaScript, just to kind of get those gears running. Oh, this is how I can filter, this is how I can sort. But for anything that's kind of serious, you'll see that there's a lot of things handled for you. So that's why I wanted to kind of like definitely agree with you what you
Yeah,
said last time and everything. So
yeah, yeah.
okay,
I
we have
mean,
one question.
go ahead. What?
No,
what
no, no. I'm kidding. I'm saying we're 45
let
minutes in and we haven't answered one.
Yeah, let's start with the questions.
We're
And then if something comes up.
we're gonna lose everyone here. So anyway, yeah, thank you everyone for watching. Thank you for coming here. Thanks everyone who watches it later. Thank you to everyone who's coming here participating. We already have our own crew, and like who am I talking about here? Like I'm not gonna name people specifically because I'm gonna forget somebody, and then that person is gonna be upset. But really, thank you for everyone who's sharing this and whatever. Like extremely awesome for me. It's the biggest thing here is to that I want to come here on Mondays and hang out with people that I have common interests with, right? So I can talk to Paul about a bunch of cool things. We go through, well, maybe not today, but we go through the comments, and so again, I really awesome for me, and I hopefully you also get some useful things out of these conversations. So yeah, before we answer our lonely question, so we have Jake here. Uh, Nice to see you, Jake. Thanks for all the support. We have Alex, of course. Yep, Alex as always. We have Andrew. Thank you, Andrew, for being our social media manager. We have Engine Boy. I think this is one of your subscribers now.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Cool, cool
Yeah.
kid.
So blah blah blah. My corner of the world. Yeah, Alex is from Romania. Prediction for tech in
jQuery,
2020, guys.
jQuery. Learn jQuery, 100%. It's the best. iOS apps with jQuery. See, that's how you know what you're talking about.
Where I'm going with this tech 2020, what are we talking about? About getting the job? hasn't really changed much,
Yeah, no,
you
it's
know.
the same. Yeah, it's still
Uh,
React, JavaScript, or
Making personal projects, yeah, I mean, there's a huge, again, there's 10,000 libraries. And you know what I really liked when you said, again, few live streams ago, you said like, uh every time they released a video of tech you should learn, it's like by
yeah,
by the time I would get to the third item, that would be 90 years old already,
yeah,
right?
yeah. The like
So
list every thing in the book. It's pretty insane. Like
yeah.
you need to know the difference. Like if I were to give one tip today, is that know like the fancy tech or what you need to learn to get hired. You know what I mean? Those are two different things, and just if you want to get a job, you're switching careers, focus on the fundamentals, understand what people are hiring for, and just learn those specific things. Like for me, like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React, and understanding APIs is a really good start. And if someone doesn't know that, like like you're not going to get a job. Like start with the basics, let's start with the fundamentals, kind of like what we're talking about, and then like I talked to someone, this is actually interesting, like I talked to someone who is a really good developer, they're at a senior level, right? And they looked at my project, they're like, oh wow, Paul, you're doing GraphQL. And they're like, I've never used it before. And this guy makes more money than I do. He makes over 100K, and he's just never had the reason to learn it. He still has a job. He's fine doing stuff with regular REST APIs. You know what I mean? So there's plenty of stuff, uh, to learn, that you don't have to know everything. You know what I mean? Like I don't even like. Okay, I love React. I don't even care for Gatsby. I'm just gonna say it right now. I don't care for Gatsby. I'm never gonna learn Gatsby because I think Next.js is just great. That's it.
Let me pile on Paul, what Paul just said. It has been literally same experience with, I would say, 90% of my interviews, maybe even 95, where you talk about stuff. I remember that I went at the time when React hooks was maybe 2 3 months or whatever, and I talked about hooks, and they're like, "Cool, awesome." I read the blog post. We'll never use it. I'm like, I mean, that one I kind of would disagree by now. I don't know what that company is doing, but what was interesting for me, I saw really conservative companies switching here in LA, and I was like, that's when I was like, no, I need to update my course because this is not this flashy new thing. They are actually doing that. But Paul is exactly correct. Whereas this like, okay, yeah, GraphQL is cool, but we have all this code base with REST API.
Yeah.
Do you know how long it's going to take for me to update? And again, there's like bunch of these cool things, and yeah, so I definitely agree
I'll,
with
I'll
you.
give you another example. I love Next.js. None of the jobs that I work require me to do Next.js. It's just using React. And everybody's like, but Next.js is so much better. It's like a fuller thing. You get so much out of the box. I'm like, but I'm still using React at work. Like it's, and so you don't need to know everything. But I think what people have to do is to have their own plan of the things that they need to learn and just stick to learning those things, not jump around until they get hired. And so, like, for me, it's been a very specific thing that I'm learning. And I'm actually, you know, saying no from talking about like a couple of live streams we did a while ago. Like I say no to certain things that I don't want to learn. Like Angular, that's a hard no for me. Not because it's bad. Angular is really good. I actually liked it from when I took a brief look at it. I'm just like, I don't have time, and there's so much stuff to learn. I'm just going to stick to React and stick with JavaScript and Node. That's like my main thing. Like the only thing that I'm going to add to it, because it's definitely a trend and everybody's doing it, is TypeScript. React and TypeScript seems to be like the big thing, and that's something with like Angular. That's a must. Like Angular and TypeScript, it's all like one thing. But yeah, definitely have your path and your plan.
Yeah, that we could make that one as a main theme where I like. I think Wes Boss uses that kind of expression where you like sitting on your hands. So you literally, instead of jumping for like to every newest thing, you sit on your hands. You wait, right? At this point, 100% agree with you. Where TypeScript has eventually become this thing where you like there's already more jobs and everything, but again, this is one out of maybe 15 things, right? It doesn't mean that every time something else like new comes up that you need to right away jump on that. But I do agree with you on TypeScript for sure.
Yeah, and by the way, with like TypeScript, I had a bunch of interviews before I even started learning TypeScript, and I'd be like, look, I don't know TypeScript. And they're like, oh, it's okay. You could learn it after you get hired as long as you're really good at JavaScript and React. So it's not even like a must. It's like nice to have. And they know if you know JavaScript, you're going to learn TypeScript fairly quickly, because it's just addition to JavaScript.
And one last thing that I want to add, I was interviewing for one of the Auth companies, like pretty major one. And what's funny was, so I was talking to the senior developer and blah, 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 and he's like, yeah, and we don't use CSS Grid. We use only CSS Flexbox. And the reason why I was laughing, because I remember when I was when every time I make a project and I just make a simple freaking navbar with Flexbox, I get this one special guy or girl or whatever. Oh, you don't know how to use CSS Grid. And I'm like, okay, you got me. I don't know how
I
to
don't know
use
how to do
CSS
anything.
Grid.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, we
Yeah.
have here. What are your thoughts on React Router 6? Awesome. Really like
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
No, go ahead. I was gonna say I haven't tried it yet, just because I'm like, oh, I did my whole application with regular React Router.
Yeah, I
Now the
saw.
new one came out.
I saw the switch statement when I watched the live stream.
You know what?
The bits
That's
and
yeah.
parts.
I know.
But
I know.
no, I like. It's awesome. Actually, it is awesome. It's one of those things where, again, I wouldn't like run back to my already complete applications and then refactor everything. But as far as straight out of the box, yes, it's very intuitive. Like I was talking about the nested routes, extremely simple. Like literally, you just set up the right there and then you have that component that showcases that. Auth is extremely simple. You know how to restrict the access to the route. What else? What else? Navigating around, again, very straightforward. And then last one, I guess, they have this nav link, which is essentially, they make it very easy if you have active link. So that's the page you're on. Again, same deal, just pretty much straight up. So I really enjoy it. Yeah, it's going to be a MERN course. We will do pretty much all the things that I just mentioned. I just actually recorded that part. But to everyone who's watching, it's going probably slower than I wanted to, because I've started doing like a little kind of intro sections as far as what we're going to be doing in that video, because people have liked that from the Node course. So it adds a little bit of time for me to set up the video and record, but I think the quality is going to be better. So it's one of those things. Yes, I know it might take longer than I actually wanted to, but instead of kind of, it is what it is, I'm just kind of pushing right now, and when it's going to be out, it's going to be out. So yeah, not much has changed as far as React Router 6 has some basic changes, but nothing too difficult to get along with. Yeah. It's not like, again, this whole new API, but the features that they have implemented, it feels a little bit like less, I'm not going to use clunky. It was never clunky. It feels a little bit easier, let's put it this way.
Yeah.
Even the naming, right? So you have routes and whatever. So yeah,
Yeah.
I would
Maybe
definitely say.
maybe in my next live stream tomorrow I'll refactor React to React 6 router.
So we have
Maybe.
Mr. Wing. Who is the guy who write Split? I assume we're talking about Paul. That's Paul from Coding After 30.
We related. We're brothers, twins,
Yes.
twins.
Okay, we have this one. Angular 13 is faster than previous versions. Angular is powerful, still why most hate overreact. Your opinion, sir? First of all, I don't think that neither Paul or me are hating on anything. That's not the point. Again, this is kind of one of those things where I have always said and always will say that like extremely cool applications are built with a tech that like it's not popular, it's whatever, and it gets the job done. So for me, I've always said that if I'm gonna live somewhere where it's only Angular jobs, I would gladly learn it or whatever if there's no choice. If I have a choice at the point where, look, there's first of all React jobs all over, like it's not that much Angular. And so if that's the choice, I kind of just feel I find like React more, I guess, intuitive, whatever. But like we kept saying, Vue.js is extremely big in Russia. Angular, I assume, is big somewhere else in China or whatever. So this is, you kind of misunderstood the point a little bit, I think.
Yeah, no, I think Angular is really good. Vue is really good, and like I think like whatever they pay me money to learn, especially if it's in demand in my area, that's the thing I'm going to learn. But in my case, for instance, like React is very popular where I live. I'm very comfortable with React. I looked at Angular. Angular is good, and it has a lot of stuff that React doesn't have. You have to like routing, like you have to add routing to React. You know, it has all that great stuff. But after like looking at it, I was just personality wise, I didn't like how they did certain things because I'm so used to React. It doesn't mean that Angular is bad. It's just that I don't have a reason to learn Angular because there's plenty of React jobs. Now, if I was doing jQuery, it's like,
Yeah, but this is kind of my big little bit gripe on this. Again, I'm gonna go on a ramble, but it's 58 minutes, and I will answer Alex's question. Well, I mean, we will answer Alex's question, but I do want to go on a ramble where a little bit, there seems to be no nuance left. It's either one thing, either you literally have people who are hating on stuff, right? So they just complain, blah blah blah, and then there's other side where you cannot say normally just express your opinion of what I like and what I dislike. When I say something, I have my last intention is to offend somebody, to say that I'm better, but I still I'm like kind of allowed to have my opinions, right? How I approach things, right? So let's say if my approach setting up the Twitter account, I treat the people who follow my account the same how I want to be treated. What do I mean by that? Well, that means that I'm not pushing all the time my courses. That means that I'm not retweeting that every time when somebody comments on me or whatever. I'm not saying I don't appreciate people who do that. I like that, but my point, there's some kind of communication that I like to express how I want to be talked to. Now, with that said, right away, the moment you say that, so what do you mean? You dislike such and such because he's doing that? Did I say that? I'm saying this is my approach. This is how I like to do things, and that's it. You don't need to right away combine them and say that I hate
yeah,
everybody else
oh
and I'm
yeah,
better. So this
yeah.
is kind of this is really bugs me in this era a little bit where there's literally no nuance, right?
It's like me saying I love cake, and all of a sudden someone's like, "You don't like ice cream? What the hell's wrong with you?" No, I
Yeah,
didn't say that. I didn't. I said I
it,
like cake, and I prefer but I also like. That's why if people just want to like, it's funny because it seems like people are divisive with everything in US,
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
React, Angular, food, like sports, and to me I'm like, no, like you could like more than one thing. And literally the only reason I do React is because I started learning React first. I am better at React than I am at anything else, and there's plenty of jobs. If I started learning Angular first and I lived in an area where Angular was more popular, what do you think I would say I like most? Angular, because that's the thing that I got used to and started with, but they're both good. It's not like if you okay, just listen to me, guys. If you learn React, you're going to get a job. If you learn Angular, you're going to get a job. Even if you learn PHP with Laravel, you're going to get a job. If you learn Python, you're going to get a job. They're all great, you know, as long as like the area you live has that particular stack. Like somebody was telling me in Argentina, PHP is super popular. You learn PHP, you got a job. And so like we're not saying that, oh, because I do React, everything else sucks. Like a lot of people don't know this. I love C sharp. I just have no desire like learning it because it's too much. I've done ASP.NET. I think it's pretty good. Their ecosystem is amazing. Um, I just personally like React better, but it doesn't mean that it's bad.
yeah. I definitely wanted to approach to kind of tackle this one. Okay, so we got a really good one from Alex. I gotta ask, how do you guys plan your project? This is a really tough one for me because it has become more of a well, like if we're talking about just specifics of like the tech side, or we're talking about the ideas. So if we're talking about ideas, I was like pretty much have said already multiple times that one of the things in order to kind of I wouldn't use word maybe stand out, but in order to do something more interesting, I am looking for those startups for from Indie Hackers podcast, what they're doing, and what would be the interesting project for me to recreate or maybe to create from my own, like kind of like whatever I think that would be cool. Like I have few ideas of where basically not just maybe the particular startup, but I have noticed some ideas that I maybe think that I could do better in a sense that just I mean in my opinion better as far as the approach. So that would be the idea part, which is, to tell honestly, a lot of times it's for me at least, it's one of the toughest ones because I don't want to just blindly, copy somebody else, but like I want to kind of take that idea and then make it my own. Now, as far as the tech, uh, yeah, that's I mean, a lot of it comes down to as far there is no straight up planning for me. I literally a lot of times I have this kind of main idea where everything is gonna be, like in my head, even before like not writing or whatever, and then I slowly start piecing kind of like where it's gonna be. But a lot of times it is kind of like this brick by brick kind of approach. So I set up this one, okay. So now let's move on to that one. I mean, I have the entire picture in my head. I have some mock-ups from the Figma or whatever, right? So in my head I have this like, okay, so I'm gonna have components folder, I'm gonna have pages, and I mean I already have that type of approach in the head. And then it's kind of like, okay, let's set up this page, and then let's set up the component, let's set up the C, and kind of like moving that direction. I don't know whether it answers, but I'm also probably not the best person to ask because like for me it's also depends on a project that I'm making, on what tech I'm going to be making, since like I keep all the time saying, I know I'll be recording this in React course, in Next.js course, in Gatsby course. Like I know already it's going to be get recorded. So a lot of times for me, picking that project comes with, well, what makes most sense? So I have the project idea for Next.js, but is it going to make sense for my MERN course? So that's also like right away that one. And yeah, so what do you think, Paul, about this one? What's your approach on that one?
Yeah, and I think like it depends like from work standpoint if you just starting out as a junior developer, because when I started out, like I didn't have to plan too much. It was more of like we have these are the pages we have. We want you to make similar pages to this. So there was always working example. Now for personal projects, like I used to hate planning, but I realized that if you don't have an idea of what you're going to build, you waste a lot of time. So I started to do like very easy planning, like, and I would break things into like very small slices. Like one example would be like, I want to build a, let's say, an application that has users and blog posts and whatever else, comments and likes. Like I wouldn't just start trying to build everything at once. I would just say, let me build, a page that will show a list of blogs, then let me build a thing which will have a detailed blog page. That means like I need to get blocks from like a backend. In my case, I would always use Strappy because Strappy is the best thing you could possibly use for any of your projects that you're building. And I would literally set that up. I will build and let me back up first. I think about the way that data is stored in a database. So like a blog post will have an ID, a user, content, title, meta tags, whatever it is. Like think about that first, and then I would make the simplest working like prototype of that. So like in the case of blogs, I would, okay, can I create an endpoint with Strappy where I could get the list of blogs, and then can I display those blogs on the front end and make sure that works, and then I'll build on top of that. And once you get that initial thing, like you've talked about many times, like when you're coding, you're either putting something on screen, you getting it from an API, you're displaying the list of items or that single item. And once you have that basic functionality, everything else you do is basically a repetition of that, and so once you, like for me, once I get that basic circle, then it's like, oh, I need to have users. So probably follow like similar example, or I'm going to have comments, similar type of stuff. So that's kind of what I do.
Yeah, just to reiterate, so for me, it's definitely getting that idea first. Once you get the idea, I like to kind of what really helps me to keep everything organized, because I understand that giving the example of, well, I don't really plan that much doesn't make that much sense. But there is a point where, exactly like just Paul said, once you set up the users for the fifth time in your project, I mean, you kind of don't really need to plan that much. You already, okay, I understand what's going to be happening. Now, what really helps me though is have this visual, I like kind of in front of me. So, like I kept saying, a lot of times I like to go and look at the bunch of mockups, like Theme Forest, and just find specific things. It doesn't even, I very rarely I go there and I can reuse like bunch of things from there. But I scroll through them and I'm like, okay, this is what I want. This is going to be in this. This is going to be this page in my project. I get it. I set it up. Okay, that's going to be this project. And then I have essentially by the time I start building, I have these list of the things that I want to do. So this is how the register is going to look. This is how that is going to look. And then I just slowly, go, page by page. But as far as just the code structure, yeah, I mean, that one is more or less already in place because with every project, you already know, okay, these are going to be my utils. This is going to be that. And you kind of already have that idea. And one thing I do want to ask you though is, so I saw in your live stream you have this little like kind of not a mock-up maker, but or whatever. When you were making blogs, you have this very basic, but I actually really like. What do you use for that?
I think it's called a draw.io, and I
Uh
literally only do it because, like I said, like if I don't have a basic kind of idea that I mock out, then I'll be spinning my wheels trying to try every possible thing. So it kind of helps me to limit myself. Like I'm like, okay, this is what I want for the UI to look like. This is the data that I want to use, and then I'll go and start building it. And like because I'm not a designer, for me, like I don't need to make it pretty. And actually, what's funny, a lot of people like some people like complain about my app. They're like, "Oh, your CSS looks like garbage." I'm like, because I don't give a about CSS right now because I want it to work. I want the functionality first as a developer because I know for CSS I know how to do it. I could go back and do it, but it's like a time waster right now because I don't care how pretty the app is if it doesn't work. With that being said, though, if I were to put that application into my portfolio, I would want the CSS to look beautiful, and I would probably buy a template or something. You know what I mean? Like, or buy a design, and then write the CSS for it. But when I'm building stuff, I do not care about CSS at all at the beginning because for me, it has to work first because that's what like you're getting paid for. You're not getting paid to make something look pretty because anybody could do it as a developer at some point, but you're getting paid to get it to work and do the thing, that you want it to do. So um, I kind of went to a whole different place there.
All right, and that sums up. We have 1 hour and 10 minutes. Again, a massive thank you, first of all, to Paul for showing up because he's in the middle of a very interesting point, and I really, 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 really appreciate the fact that he showed up and everything. That and very grateful for that. And as always, very interesting conversation. Best time, best way to spend Monday evenings. Get ready for the week, and yeah, thank you to everyone who showed up. Thank you to everyone who commented, who participated. It was awesome. And you want to sign off? Sound off?
Yeah, like I just want to say the last thing somebody said, like for Angular or React, what backend would you use? And they said Java or Node, like Strappy. Like you just use Strappy all the time. Okay,
I wish
like
they
for
could give us $5 every time you say
yeah,
this.
100%. No, but I want to say thank you for everybody who attended today. It's always fun to have a chat with you. Thank you, John, for constantly inviting me back. Like I'm some dude on the internet,
So,
who switched careers late in life. And it's kind of nice to be part of a group of like minded people where we actually talk about code and, learning stuff and doing the things that, will actually help you get to your next level. So
yep,
thank you so much.
yep. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next week. Next week. Next week. Next week.
Yep. See you
See ya.
guys.